Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Please welcome to the stage Colonel Mike Black, U.S. Air Force retired, Vice President for Defense at AFCEA International.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the panel session, How Are We Enabling Our Information Policies, Systems, Processes, and Warfighters to Ensure Decision Superiority? Now, before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge Appian for their sponsorship of this panel session. They are represented here today by Sabrina Lemire, Customer Success Manager. Now, I have the pleasure and the pressure, as she's my boss, of introducing the moderator of the panel, Lieutenant General Susan Lawrence, United States Army, retired, President and CEO of AFCEA International. General Lawrence's remarkable Army career, in which she went from E1 to 09, culminated with her assignment as the Army's CIO G6, where she managed the Defense Enterprise Systems, IT infrastructure, C4 solutions, and advanced technology used by the military warfighter and the supporting civilian workforce. Additionally, she helped develop Army Cyber Command and worked directly with senior staff members, including the Secretary and Chief of Staff of the Army, to reduce costs and improve the effectiveness of cyber and other IT solutions. She's a leader in defense information technology and communication systems, and after retiring from the Army and before becoming to AFCEA, worked at Booz Allen Hamilton and Accenture Federal Services. She joined AFCEA in January 2022 as the organization's first female president and CEO. General Lawrence, thank you for joining us today, and I turn it over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Well, thank you all for attending our panel today. Good show. I don't know who all made the lunch event today, but it was Vice Admiral Tianson. It was an amazing rundown of all that the Coast Guard is doing and the partnerships, and it was really fabulous. So I think when it comes to information support of our defense systems, I don't know that anybody in the room would argue it's all about the data. And that's kind of the long pole in the tent as we go forward. So informed, timely support of these decisions are at the heart of the effective command and control that cannot happen without the basics, including tagging, formatting, displaying data so that it can be protected, shared, and analyzed. Cybersecurity is integral to protecting availability and accuracy of the data. And we'll hear from our distinguished panel members today on topics such as JADC2, zero trust, and data veracity. How do you know you can trust the data? You can see the entire bios of our panel members on our website. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panel member, Mr. Aaron Weiss, Chief Information Officer of the United States Department of Navy. He's responsible for information management, digital, data, and cyber strategies. He is leading the reinvigoration of the DON's information environment through the implementation of information superiority vision, the vision. And I had the privilege of working with Mr. Weiss in my past positions, and we're excited with what you've accomplished and where you are going. So over to you, sir.
All right. Thanks, General. I'm excited to be here to talk with this motley crew of people who I get to work with. Of course, I would not put the Coast Guard in that crew. I'm excited to be here and talk about information superiority. You know, as we laid out information superiority for the Department of Navy vision, you know, it's rooted in a set of simple ideas. And people often ask me, so what is your requirement? What are your requirements? What are you trying to do? And I have something that personally I hold, and I doubt that it's in any published requirement, but I think that the requirement that I try to work to as the CIO of the Department of Navy is the golden requirement. Okay, if we have the golden rule, I have the golden requirement. And I think it underpins a whole lot of the conversations we may have today. And it is to be able to securely move any information from anywhere to anywhere. And if you unpack that statement, there's a whole lot to it, right? We start talking about traversing levels of classification from the enterprise to the tactical edge, doing that securely at will and maneuvering in that environment to support the mission. And as we move on from that and get into how do you make that happen, I think the information superiority vision, brings that to life in three simple ideas. We've got to modernize the Department of Navy's information environment because it wasn't where it needed to be to accommodate the golden rule and the golden requirement, let alone all the other things. And then on that modernized infrastructure, we need to create innovation. And innovation is what we do to drive a competitive advantage, and competitive advantage is what allows us to win. And along the way, the third element of the information superiority vision is defend. We must be able to defend the department's information wherever it is, whether it's at rest, in transit, in the supply chain, you name it. It's a simple thing to say, but it's not something that we had a great track record at. So those three simple ideas, sort of underpinned by the golden requirement, are what motivates us. It's become a guiding vision, and from that, a whole lot of activity spawns. But I think bringing it back to the topic at hand today, those simple ideas, and especially the golden requirement, underpin a whole lot of what we're going to talk about. So if we want to talk about JADC2 and integrated long-range fires, well, the golden requirement is all over that one, right? And we have to, and as a CIO, we have to create the environment where that can happen, so that other, much smarter people than me are going to enable that capability, for the sailors and Marines through that. So that, I think, is what underpins this, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and looking forward to the questions, frankly.
Thank you, sir. Our next panelist is Lieutenant General Matthew Glavey, and today he serves as the Deputy Commandant for Information for the United States Marine Corps. And in this role, General Glavey develops and supervises plans, policies, and strategies for operating in an information environment, and he identifies the requirements to make it all happen in doctrine, manpower, training, education, and equipment in support of the Marine Air Ground Task Force operations. Sir, thank you for joining us today.
Ma'am, thank you. And I really want to start by thanking you and Admiral Daly for putting this together, and my good friend, Colonel Mike Black. Mike was the commanding officer of the White House Communications Agency when I was the CO of HMX-1. I thought I had the best job, but I think Mike really had the best job. Everywhere the president went, Mike was literally right next to him. So great shipmate, great wingman. It's great to see you here, two brothers. So good on you. Man, what a conference! Holy cow! Day one is a head spinner. Certainly starting out with our Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps and impactful comments I'd like to touch on. But probably as important is how you finished the day, and that was with our Copernicus Award winners. My hat's off to you, Admiral Daly, and all the team, taking that time to recognize the people who matter most in this whole journey, and that's our Marines, our young Marines, our NCOs, our young officers that make all this happen. All this fancy talk really turns into someone literally making it happen. We had a great opportunity to spend time at the Indo-PACOM Commander's Course with Admiral Aquilino, kind of set up really a great display of where we're at on this. And his comment is, A4, certainly, but his last comment, most impactful comment, let us not forget, we can do none of this without the sergeants. And it was pretty cool that he said that, and it was really awesome that you took time and made that important, recognize those award winners. So thank you, ma'am. Thanks again. So I'd certainly start off with what the Assistant Commandant talked about yesterday. We have this really incredible journey going on in the Marine Corps called Force Design. Very disruptive, very disruptive. I don't know if I told you it's disruptive. Anything that involves change is hard, right? A lot of criticism, all good, by the way. We need to be hardened by that. But there's no doubt we're on this journey of modernization and, in parallel, innovation. They're really separate and distinct, but they have, this commandant has afforded both to happen. That's really important, by the way. You know, we talk about modernization, new capabilities, from amphibious combat vehicle to what we do with our medium landing ship, to what we are going to do with our anti-strike missile, to what we're going to do with our intermediate range anti-air capabilities, to certainly all the things that we heard during the multi-domain operations discussions that our colonels came up and talked about. Really powerful. You missed it, go back and YouTube it. But that was about innovation, kind of separate and distinct. The innovation piece is really about programs of record that we have today that we're using in different ways, very innovative ways that the Commandant and our MEF commanders have been empowered to do. As the Commandant went down Force Design, he very much had a two-pronged approach. One was modernize, modernize, modernize. There's a lot of OSD, civilian leadership, over to the Hill, the Congress, how important they are. But the innovation side is kind of where the magic happens. And he made a very distinct decision to afford the MEF commanders to do much of that innovation. And hopefully you got to hear General George Smith and General Chip Bierman, our 1 MEF and 3 MEF commanders, talk about what they're doing with respect to that with Admiral Aquilino and how critical Admiral Paparo eloquently stated it yesterday. So they tied up certainly a lot of what we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, that innovation really is about things that already exist, right? Exquisite intel. Part of my job is the HICE, the head of the IC element for the Marine Corps, combined with command and control, right? So exquisite intel with command and control, which, parochially, our Marine Air Control Group, no one does it better, parochially, from a Marine, then ultimately how we match that with the weapons target pairing. That includes joint all-domain effects. And throw that problem set in front of Marines, right? Kind of take some of the boundaries away and watch what's happening. And on that football field at Camp Smith, a lot of that was demonstrated for certainly our Indo-Pacific commander. So again, it was really insightful and inspirational to see all that happen. All of it obviously driven by what we're going to talk about today. Whatever war function we would talk about, whatever booth we would go to, it's driven by this thing called information. And in its essence, it's certainly data, but more refined, it's this information. And more defined, it's the ability to fuse and correlate that information to drive outcomes. It's the onus of my existence to do that on behalf of the Commandant, to drive us in those directions. And then on top of all that, if that wasn't enough, if modernization wasn't hard enough, and all the innovation that's taken place, we have this incredible disruption that's caused certainly by the Marines as well, but by industry. What am I talking about? So 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, all we would talk about is denied, degraded environments. I think that was one of our panel discussions, right? Denied, degraded. So, of course, our response to that is, well, looks like we got to bring everything with us, right? It's going to be denied, degraded. Bring all your stuff with you, right? That's not going to happen, right? So that's really physically impossible. But the industry disruption is this thing called prolific LEO, right? It was kind of maybe if you're really a good industry intelligence follower, you would have caught on to this. But I don't think anybody realized the ability to put 3,000 plus satellites, 30 at a time, into orbit and do it without breaking a sweat. Did we see that coming? And how disruptive is that? So as we work with our systems command and work with our program executive offices, man, we've kind of rocked their world, right? So all our requirements to do something based on a legitimate requirement, that being a degrade, denied environment, right, now turns into more options, lots more options, and really affords incredible opportunity. So as I describe all those events that we're doing on behalf of the combatant commanders, what's in the middle of it, right? This persistent LEO capability that now makes some of the things that I got to take care of maybe less prevalent. Not, you know, it's more opportunity. Every commo, I've learned this. I'm a helicopter pilot, by the way. I've learned this. You got to have a good PACE plan, right, ma'am? You got to have a PACE plan, right? Primary, alternative, contingency, emergency. And so all these things are coming to play to really get after this denied, degraded environment. And as planners, military planners, we got to afford that opportunity. You know, the Marines, this idea of the stand-in force, right, is being in some of these less than ideal locations, right? Key terrain, as we would like to call it, key maritime terrain, even more specific, on behalf of the fleet commanders in order to create this dilemma for the adversary. You ain't bringing everything with you, right? And so we got to be light and lethal. The ECMAC talked certainly extensively about that. So we're in this continuous state of change. And whatever we thought we nailed, I think we got to be really careful on what's next, especially in this environment. And again, our industry partners, you all have been so important to that. So why? Like, why is this important? Why am I even have this job? Why did we stand the DCI up? Well, why? Really one word: readiness. Readiness, right? The Naval Expeditionary Force and readiness is the Marine Corps. Therefore, we got to provide that capability to our fleet commanders to execute. And to really fine-tune that comment is what the Commandant always says: ready for what, with what, when, right? You really got to get in that level of detail, because readiness, as an aviator, hey, how many mission-capable airplanes do we have? That may be doing no good in the first island chain based on a COCOM requirement, but being specific, and really specific from an information standpoint scenario, right? All these great partnerships we talk about around the world, really powerful what's going on. We're, you know, the agreements now with the Japanese to have the 12th Marine Littoral Regiment in Japan, Secretary of Defense and others have done a great job there. The recent announcement about the 5 additional training locations in the Philippines, like, these are impactful, major impactful events. So as we partner, learn, grow, mentor, learn some more with them, right, we could go from theater security cooperation partnership events to crisis, to conflict, right? So we have to be ready with what, where, when. So, you know, those are so important on why we are here. It is truly about readiness. Only reason I exist. Lastly, and really it's where I started. It's all about people. Colonel John Boyd, Air Force officer, one each, had a profound impact on the Marine Corps. I don't know if you know the story. I won't go through it all. But MCDP-1, Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 1, warfighting, is a basis of a lot of his work that he did on the discourse on winning and losing. Boyd was a wild man, cantankerous, bombastic, you know, lived in the desert, ate bugs, wore animal skin, right? Not really, but he was that guy, right? He was that guy. And Boyd had this idea of the Trinity. And it went something like that: people, ideas, and things in that order. But he looked through everything through that lens. I think as we move forward, especially from a highly technical standpoint, we still need that lens to ensure that critical piece, innovation, truly happens. So again, ma'am, I want to thank you for everything you have done, and it's really great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our third panelist is Rear Admiral Tracy Hines, the Director of Cybersecurity Division in the Office of the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information and Director of Naval Intelligence. Prior to her current role, she most recently commanded NCTS San Diego and the Hopper Information Service Center, followed by an assignment as the Executive Assistant to the Chief of Naval Operations. I want to thank you for agreeing to jump in here on short notice. We really appreciate it. Over to you, ma'am.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant General Lawrence, and I'd also like to thank Admiral Daly for this awesome opportunity. I see a lot of familiar, friendly faces out there, so I look forward to our stimulating conversation. Mr. Weiss already talked about information superiority, but I think the other part of that is that we need to have decision superiority. And I know you've heard this before. We need to make sure we have the right information at the right time, getting to the right entities. Sounds really, really easy, but we know how complex and challenging that can be. So it's really awesome for me to be in the position of the requirements and resources so I can make sure, hey, we get that piece right. We rack and stack what we need so that we can get it out there to the warfighter to really have that decision superiority. You know, there are a lot of capabilities out there, and I'll tell you, it's just been really, really awesome to be here because seeing all this technology just really excites me. Because it's like I want to go shopping. I want one of them, I want one of that, I want one of this, and you know, and it really can be overwhelming. But again, we got to make sure, you know, we know where we're trying to go and we're going there together. And sometimes we do get wrapped up, especially in the OpNav world, with, oh, we got to have this policy, got to have this procedure, and we got to have all these things right. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that we're doing to streamline that piece of it. And I also talk about, of course, you know, cybersecurity in all of that and what we're doing to move that forward. When we were sitting in the green room, it was interesting. Because you know, Admiral Trussler would want to talk about things under the water. I'm not the expert in that, but I will tell you, there was a book. It was Global Hawk to Triton. And I was like, wow, how awesome is that? You know, the unmanned capabilities and where we're going with that. And I know Admiral Ashback talked a lot about that earlier. But I'll tell you, I met up with the NAVO team yesterday, and they said, hey, we've been doing underwater for the, you know, surveillance and doing unmanned underwater vehicles for the past 20 years. So when you think about those tag ships and the surveillance capabilities and things that they've been doing, it's like you're absolutely right. So I think what Admiral Trussell would want to leave the team with is, hey, hopefully we're taking, you know, we're partnering up and we're learning from the things that we've already accomplished with respect to unmanned under the sea. I was blown away by one of the surveyors has like about 7,200 and something days at sea. And I don't know any other surface warfare that has that kind of time at sea. But there's a lot to be learned in that capability. So I mentioned, you know, at OpNav, hey, our role is to provide the policy and the requirements and resources to support the Navy. Not only the Navy we have now, but more importantly, the Navy that we think and that we know we're going to need in the future. I think from the ACMAC leading off with, hey, it's that future fight that we need to make sure that we're ready for. So we need to be making those decisions from a resource and requirement standpoint to be ready for that future fight. The CNO's NAV plan has set us on course to do just that. This is what's going to guide us in our execution of our priorities. You know, in accordance with this direction, we are maintaining, recovering, accelerating, and integrating our collective information advantage. We are also aligned across the Naval Service, oriented to meet and overcome information environment challenges as well. So, like I said, we are laser focused on strengthening future capability, developments in the information space, and we continue to tighten alignment to reduce seams and dependencies through the execution of the navigation plan. So it's good when you have that guide-on barrier to kind of tell you, hey, here's how you need to get there. We also empower and maximize our partnerships, of course, with other services in our joint communications and our allies and interagency partners as well. So, like I said, we're constantly working to streamline our policies and procedures so that we can make sure we enable the delivery of the capabilities that the warfighter needs, like I said, in a timely manner, and not getting hooked up sometimes around, oh, we got to wait for this or we got to wait for that. I told my team I would stay on script for the most part, but it's kind of hard because I get really excited about this. So I talked about cybersecurity. More importantly, cyber resiliency. You know, that's another approach from the policy and process side, especially in the denied, degraded, intermittent, and limited environment. We are developing new capabilities and more effectively for us to be able to compete at the strategic level. There's a lot of details in that, and I'm not going to go into too many specifics, but I'll tell you, this approach has been applied in many of our exercises in recent years and has enabled the warfighter to develop the muscle memory necessary to fight through the adversary action and other sources of the D-Day effect. So the Navy is also leading the charge, of course, the Department of the Navy, even the shift to zero trust. That's even from a DOD standpoint. These principles in network design and operation, I know Mr. Weiss talked yesterday about flank speed and how we've made a lot of movement in our whole enterprise implementation. And this has already paid huge dividends in our ability just to collaborate Navy-wide. So I'm very, very excited about where we're going. And also, like I mentioned earlier, we're working with our allies. We're working to improve our interoperability capabilities as well. So there's, I could go on, but I want to make sure that we do leave time for questions. I will just say, across the future years, defense plan, the Navy has made significant investments in AI, ML algorithms also to improve our decision advantage at the tactical edge, as well in our day-to-day business operations. So I look forward to going on this journey with you, and I look forward to hearing your questions and concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Our fourth panelist is Rear Admiral Christopher Bartz, the Assistant Commandant for the Communications, Computers, and Information Technologies. In this capacity, he serves as the Coast Guard's Chief Information Officer. He previously served as the J7 for U.S. Cyber Command, where he developed joint training and readiness standards and orchestrated large-scale exercises. He also served as the Coast Guard's Chief Information Security Officer and Commanding Officer of the Coast Guard's Operations Systems Center. Over to you, Admiral.
So, General Lawrence, thanks for inviting me to this panel. It's really great. It's great to see General Glavy again. We worked together in Cybercom, and it's good to see everybody. A lot of my capstone classmates are here. It's great to see some industry partners. So, really appreciate the invite here. I want to talk a little bit about kind of set up the Coast Guard conversation a little bit differently than my counterparts, and start with what Admiral Tiansen at the keynote address started talking about. He talked about the Agile Coast Guard Force. He talked about Coast Guard Cutter Kimball operating with the 7th Fleet and the Japanese Navy in the South China Sea. He talked about Coast Guardsmen and Coast Guard cutters engaging with Chinese fleets that are engaged in illegal, unreported, and undetected fishing. So IUU fishing, which is depleting our fish stocks. He didn't talk about, but what is also occurring is our counter-narcotics mission that's occurring in the East Pac. That's also being accomplished by our Coast Guard crews. Something that's going on in the Caribbean that's not really reported in the news is that the Haitian government has ceased to exist. The country is really being run by local politicians, and that is forcing a mass migration in the maritime environment that's not really reported yet. You usually hear things happening in the southern border, but we're definitely seeing an increase in migrant flow in the Caribbean, mostly from Haiti. And so that's a big event that we're having to respond to. That in addition to the normal port security, the enforcement of laws and treaties within our territorial waters, the search and rescue, the contingency operations that we engage in when we have a hurricane or other natural disaster. Most don't know that we routinely will deploy up to 2/3 of our forces down to the affected and devastated areas. And so we have an agile force. I think what my challenge is that I need to create an agile C5I service delivery organization. And that's my challenge. I want to talk a little bit about how I'm trying to manage that. And what I'd like to have is I like to have a capability discussion followed by a risk discussion. So I look at my portfolio in 4 different ways. One is the C5I that we have installed on our boats, our cutters, and our aircraft, and our shore units. And so we have baseline configuration, and the capability is how we meet that baseline, and the risk is really how we deviate from that baseline. The second thing that I really look at is, and this is what Admiral Breyer Joyner is going to talk about at JADC2, is kind of our version of JADC2, which is how do we maintain maritime domain awareness. Our requirement is from the coastline out to the 200-mile EEZ, which is about 20 million square miles of water that we're responsible for. Again, we've acquired a lot of Type 1 acquisition systems. Rescue 21 was a multi-million-dollar acquisition that we made. That's about a $100 million a year program that we have going. We have other programs that offer maritime domain awareness, but those systems don't talk to each other. And that's a problem for us. General Lawrence mentioned it's all about the data. Well, our data is stovepiped in these Type 1 acquisition systems. We don't really have a way to transfer from one system to another. Our crews don't necessarily get the situational awareness that they need to have. So that's an area that we're going to invest in. We're going to melt the iceberg. We're going to look at how do we get this data into an integrated data environment? How do we have sensors and software and systems plug into that integrated data environment? And how do we share data with not only our DoD counterparts, but also our counterparts in DHS? The third thing that I look at is managing our IT systems. So we have 11 statutory missions, and we have missions that are, we have IT systems that are specific to those missions. We also have the back-end business systems that everyone else has. And so, supporting those systems is a real challenge. So you have to, if you want to be an agile force and have an agile C5I delivery mechanism, you have to be able to pivot and say, okay, well, here's the problem for the day. How are we going to augment that system? And then when another emerging mission comes in, how do you back off and then reapply your resources to something else? So I have to comply with not only cybersecurity requirements, I have DHS policy requirements that I have to comply with, and DoD policy requirements that I have to comply with. And then the last thing that I kind of look at is how do I keep these systems resilient and secure? That's a challenge. I don't think that I'm, being frank, I don't think that I'm resourced to enable zero trust fully. And so how much zero trust can I afford? Where do I put that capability? What do I protect first? We're still working through those conversations. There's a lot of needs out there. Like I said, there's 11 missions. And so you're not going to be able to appease everybody. And so, how do you have the discussions in an open forum to decide what's the priority and what's going to be lesser priority? So we're actually doing a lot. The title of this panel is all about policies, processes, and systems. So we are actually doing a lot to try to enhance our warfighters and our Coast Guardsmen. We're trying to reduce our contracting interactions. So we have just released our integrated managed services contract, which is a $900 million 10-year contract that's going to go from 6 contracts that we have currently doing that to 1. So being smarter about contracting, I think, is an area that we're going to invest in. We're standing up a software factory much like our service counterparts are. And we have a RFP that's coming out that's going to have a multi-vendor contract for software development. The name of that contract is called Agile Compass, so be ready to see that coming out. We're investing in model-based system engineering. So I think when we're talking about JADC2, that's a good way to model that, so we can model our missions, we can model our systems, we can model our interfaces, and spit out better requirements and not have to do those level 1 acquisitions. We can kind of do smaller acquisitions aimed at some large business, some small business, to have a C2 ecosystem that's going to be useful for our MDA missions. Here's an area that I need to work on is I want to try to adopt DoD's Agile Acquisition Framework, specifically the software pathway. Right now, we're using the same acquisition processes that we do mostly for our hard assets. And so going to more agile software pathway methodology, I think is gonna really help us out. We got a long way to go on that. There's a lot of stakeholders involved in the process right now, but that's an area of focus that I'm gonna have. Right now, it takes us about 3 or 4 years to get from requirements to acquisition through contracting to get to deployment, and then, but by the time we reach that, we're at system obsolescence usually. And so, how do you compact into a 4 or 5 year timeline before you run into obsolescence issues? That's a major problem for us. So that's my kickoff into what's going on in the Coast Guard. Really appreciate the invite and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Before I introduce our final panelist, we have microphones in both aisles, and we really do want to hear your questions, your comments as we go forward. I mean, I've got plenty of questions I can ask, but we'd like to hear from you. So our cleanup batter is Rear Admiral Susan Briner Joyner. Today, she serves as the Deputy Director J6, focusing on JADC2. Her operational tours include deployments to the High North and Norwegian seas for the Navy's first dynamic force employment, deployment to the Mediterranean and Arabian seas, the Western and South Pacific Oceans. She also served in Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, and so she's been on the ground and knows the challenge personally. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you so much. And again, as the other panelists, thank you for inviting me. I think this is a great opportunity to start a very important discussion. I'm going to assume that not everybody in the audience knows what Joint Staff does, because when I was sitting in the audience, I had absolutely no idea other than they were impeding progress. So let me just start with what I view my job as. I actually have 2 roles. So as the Deputy Director for C4 and Cyber, my focus is on joint warfighting requirements and capabilities. We talk about requirements, people automatically think about systems, but we're talking about material and non-material requirements. And I think that's an important distinction that I will build on a little bit later on when I talk about JADC2. My focus areas are command, control, communications, computers, cyberspace operations, spectrum, anything that touches what a 6 normally does. That's what I'm focused on, because it's very important to make sure that the joint warfighter requirements are addressed. The challenge with the way that we are organized and funded today is it is service-centric. I'm not going to blame the services for delivering exactly what they've been postured to deliver, which are service-centric capabilities, and joint is added in on the back end. That's a challenge. We have to figure out for key capabilities what must be joint from the beginning. before we go into our service-specific requirements. And I think that's really important to consider moving forward. As the chair for the Joint All-Domain Command and Control Cross-Functional Team, I'm responsible for bringing to life JADC2. And I'm going to take a moment here to talk about what that is and what that isn't, because it's become a buzzword. That buzzword has been attached to multiple things, and those multiple things may or may not look like, feel like, actually have anything to do with what I'm trying to accomplish. So I'm going to start with command and control is a function that we have been doing since the start of any conflict or competition. It's a verb. All of a sudden, I add joint and all domain to the beginning of that verb, and people treat it like a noun. Well, it must be a system. Oh, it's a system of systems. Wait, it's got to be a program of record. I am here to tell you that if we get joint all-domain command and control right, we will change the way we fight. From competition to conflict, it is about how we go into battle, how we command and control the joint force. That is what is very important. And so what I've been reinforcing with my team and what I would encourage you to help me with, JADC2 is a verb. If we're going to talk about capabilities, we talk about JADC2 capabilities, JADC2 systems, JADC2 efforts. It's important because we must speak clearly to each other about what we're trying to accomplish. One of the first things when I came into the job last May and I started looking at the expanse of everything that we were doing for joint all-domain command and control, cross-functional teamwork, we had a strategy. If you read the strategy, it was signed out by Secretary Austin, it spells out what we're trying to do. For those with a clearance and access, the Joint All-Domain Command and Control implementation plan focused on a broader ecosystem that we needed in order to bring modern command and control to life. And so you heard about things like cloud, DevSecOps, Zero Trust. And what I would offer is these characteristics in and of themselves are not joint all-domain command and control, but they're necessary for the modernization of the way we fight wars. So they're critical enablers, but they are not necessarily in and amongst themselves JADC2. Let me go to the next step. Joint all-domain command and control of what? There are 7 joint functions. One of them's command and control. The other 6, one of them's fires, and that's what everybody wants to focus on. Joint all-domain command and control applies to more than just fires. Fires is very important, don't get me wrong. But if we can't get contested logistics right, if we can't get movement and maneuver right, if we can't get each one of those functions right, we will not be effective as a joint force, okay? So that's important. And then the other dimension, because if bringing JADC2 to life was easy, it would already be done. We've been on this journey for at least 3, 4, 5 years. The other dimension is we do command and control at the strategic level, the operational level, and the tactical level. So when you're talking about command and control, it's not enough to just talk about command and control. What operational level of war are you talking about? What joint function are you talking about? And then once we've determined that, what capability are you talking about? Are you talking about the system? Are you talking about the data? Are you talking about the training, the exercises, the experimentation that is going to get us to a level of proficiency that we need in order to compete and win? That is the challenge that is in front of us. The other challenge is everybody's doing things, and I'm not asking anybody to stop. One of the biggest challenges I have with JADC2 efforts is prioritization and synchronization. If we do not synchronize across the joint force, if we are not experimenting as a joint force, we will not be able to fight and win as a joint force. And let me just complicate things further. I've said joint multiple times. We do not fight alone. If we cannot bring our coalition allies and partners together into a combined joint force, practicing with them, interoperating with them, sharing data with them, we will not accomplish what we need to accomplish. And how do we do all of that? At the end of the day, when you talk about interoperability or interchangeability, as I've heard, it comes down to data, which is where General Lawrence kicked us off. We have got to free our data from the stovepipes that exist, because until we can bring that data together in a suitable environment to do big data analytics to give us decision advantage so we can get our effects when and where we need them at a time and place of our choosing, we will not compete and win. And so I love this job. I should have started with that. I love my job. This is a tremendously important opportunity for us to work with together within existing governance, within existing processes. But if the processes and the policies are slowing you down, let us know and be precise. This specific policy, this specific page, this specific sentence, if it read this way, here's the difference I could make. Too often we complain about policy in very broad, generic terms, and when you ask people for the source, I can't get anything, right? So be specific. What are the barriers that I can help break down in order to get us capabilities faster? At the end of the day, the objective is to provide joint force commanders with the ability to coordinate and control their forces. The services already know how they are going to command and control within the service pipelines. We have to get to the graduate level on how we're going to do that at Joint Command and Control. So we're talking the global military integration, multi-domain operations, and I say multi-domain intentionally. There are very few instances that we will get all domains integrated right away to achieve a specific effect, but we need to get to that ability to coordinate across it. I've referred to interoperability with our allies and partners, and at the base of all of this is how we transform to data centricity. It's going to be a culture change, because the way we grow up is very system-centric. When you look at our defense acquisition system, and how program managers are directed to run their programs, again, it's very system-centric. So how do we begin to shift the conversation, shift the education for our operators, our acquisition professionals, et cetera, in order to think in a data-centric way? When I asked, I forget who I was having a meeting with earlier this week, when I asked if there was one thing, did we need a set of data standards? Because everybody reverts to Joint Staff, just tell us the standards, we'll build towards it, it'll all be good. It hasn't worked so far. So, data needs to be exposed. So for the folks from industry, help expose the data in your systems, help us figure out how to expose the data in legacy systems, and it needs to be well documented. Exposing it's not enough. We have to understand the context of that data. And so that's very important. I have so much more to say, but I want to hear your questions. I want to have that discussion, because it's going to take everybody in this room and beyond working together in synchronization to deliver JADC2 capabilities in time, to help us figure out how we're going to use our current capabilities if we had to fight tonight. That's where we need your help. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, very much. Okay, I don't see our first person there. Okay, Sink, you got it.
And thank you for this important discussion on decision superiority. My question is one that goes back to what Admiral Bartz talked a little bit about, and that is one of the least understood words in the human language, and certainly in the Pentagon, risk. How well are you able to, at the programmatic level, at the operational level, at the tactical level, at the budgetary level, articulate the risk in decisions that would lead to a superior decision making by whatever authority? It's very difficult, and it's time-based and everything else. How can we in industry help you with that articulation of risk?
Which risk? So
You
so,
pick one.
Well, so you listed a bunch,
Right,
but,
you pick
right?
one.
But there's mission risk, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Cybersecurity risk.
You pick the one that irritates you the most. I did 2 tours in the Joint Staff.
Let me,
so I understand that.
if you don't mind, I'll just take the first shot at how I'm trying to do it. So one of my staff members, we in IT really get down into the details, right? We love to go into the weeds. One of my staff members said to all of our peers, you need to get to the purple crayon level, right? You need to be able to explain this in ways that people understand, and especially senior leadership. So we're trying to make those risk conversations in terms of really what's going to happen operationally, right? And that is a hard thing, right? So what happens when our 75 radar goes down? Well, you can't fly your UAS, right? You can't do your counter narcotics. Those are the types of conversations that we want to have. I don't really want to get down to the widgets. I want to talk about the big pieces, right? What happens when my C2 system goes down? You can't execute mission. You can transit from point A to point B. Those are the types of conversations. So it's high-level risk. You have to bring that cyber component into it also. That's part of the risk management framework. But those are the really high level, the crayon level of talking about risk. So that's how I'm approaching it.
And let me just jump in. So cybersecurity risks, right, out there. What I need help in, and I mentioned it yesterday when I was talking about those predictive analytics, things that are going to give me those indications and warnings to tell me, hey, there's some anomaly or there's some precursor behavior that is happening. Somebody's sniffing out your system before they get in and get on the system. So that's what I need help on, helping me to get left of boom so that, we can, mitigate and be ready and not just be answering and piling on, when it comes to cybersecurity.
So I'll just throw the gauntlet. There's lots of risk. We need whether it's an application, a tool, whatever you want to call it, we need the ability to aggregate those different types of risk for the combatant commander, Joint Force Commander across all the domains. Because right now, risk, just like data, is stovepiped. We can articulate risk if this happens or risk if this happens, but in a complex environment where things are going on simultaneously, how do we help with that single pane of glass in a trustworthy way communicate to the commander, here are the different elements, and here is the risk to you with regards to your operational mission of taking this action or not taking this action. Right now, it's all happening in one commander's brain based on his or her experience, and it's probably not as effective as we need it to be.
I have an opinion. Admiral Caudle has an awesome, at Fleet Forces, has an awesome perspective on risk. And he compares it to, and I'm not trying to speak for him, but what I heard him say was he compares it to the theory of the conservation of energy, right? No new energy is ever created or destroyed, we just move it around, right? That's conservation of energy. Admiral Caudle has a conservation of risk. He believes that we don't actually create any new risk or destroy any risk, but we just move it around. And more importantly, so much of what we do at the senior levels, whether we're talking Department of Navy or Flag and SES, we manage risk by moving it. And unfortunately, I think we move it down and we talk big words. You know, we let the commanding officer accept the risk. Oh, what kind of crap is that, right? We're going to push risk down to the commanding officer and say, well, we did all the right checklists. We got, right? Tracy, we got an ATO. I got everything's good. Over to you, CO. You can accept that risk. And you know, when we talk about risk, right? Risk management, I don't think that's a long-term viable strategy to say that we're going to paper over risk and push it down to the lowest level and let's let the CO make the call. And I think too often, you know, we're comfortable with that. I know that's an easy thing to say on the E-ring. But I believe, my assertion is, we need to expose it. We need to expose it and be very transparent about it so we can have real risk-based discussions about mitigation. Yeah, that thing is not right, so what's our mitigation? Let's not talk about it that, hey, your thing is expired or you didn't check all the boxes. What is our mitigation? Whether we're talking about it from a joint employment, joint staff perspective, or we're talking about it at an individual service level perspective, or even lower. So I think the risk conversation is good, but my sense is we need to probably change our perspective. And this gets back to the soapbox that I have, which is moving away from compliance and moving towards high levels of transparency around how we manage and assess these things.
Great. That was a great question. I think you challenged General Glavy at first, but we'll come back to him on a couple of other hard ones. Yes, sir.
Scott Tousley with IT Cadre. The IT for us is innovation and transformation. Something yesterday reminded me, it's hard to believe, but back in my high school days, I was a pretty good cross-country runner, and I was in West Germany at the time, and we were trained in some of the European methods, which included what the Germans called Fartlek training, which is sometimes you're in a 10K pace, sometimes you're sprinting, and you shift between those two. Each of y'all are in complex organizations. We're all wrestling with a lot of dynamism and transformation challenge and change and everything else. How do each of you balance being patient in the real organizations you're in versus being faster, more aggressive, pushing the envelope, doing things more riskily or more aggressively? How do you balance when to be patient and when not to be so patient in 2023 in the U.S. military with all the stuff going on these days?
Yeah. Sir, would you like to take that one?
I'm sorry.
It is a great question. So when you have Mr. Weiss as your boss, a businessman, right? Hey, and you've heard some of his comments already. Very much focused on outcomes. You know, right? You don't make a profit, you're no longer in business. So there is a certain dawn environment that's focused on outcomes, right? And the question on risk is a damn good one, and it deals with different things as well. You know, so if we're in the business of targeting, let's say, risk, right? That's got to be 99.99999% right? We got to nail that level of risk, especially from how we do the fusion correlation, et cetera. But there are other things that are less riskful, right? You know, we hear this thing about fail fast, fail early, fail. But at the end of the day, you know, there is taxpayer money that's got to be used correctly. We got to be bold. We can't be reckless. We got to kind of rely on some of the technical expertise required, and certainly the relationship with industry is critical with all that. So, I mean, this is an incredible journey. I wouldn't want to do anything else. Every day has a new challenge and a new dilemma, to be quite honest. But you know, like I mentioned before, a lot of this is being led by some of the innovation in the fleet, using capabilities, you know, unlike trying to build an F-35 or a V-22 or whatever the case may be. A lot of this is kind of easier to do. You know, organizations using operations and maintenance funding to do something like persistent LEO, or to get capabilities that they can figure out how to, you know, take A plus B and really gain an asymmetric outcome. So I don't think there's, you know, any single way that we look at this. But you know, again, I think there's a culture involved. I think it starts, and I appreciate this from the Don CIO. I certainly got it from the Commandant of the Marine Corps as he executes a force design, which again involves this thing called change, which is very uncomfortable, by the way. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how I'd provide it to you.
Yeah, and I'll pile on a little bit with my Marine brother. Yes, being under the Department of the Navy, in the room with the businessmen, I tell you, it is a, hey, let's go faster, faster, faster. So quite frankly, we have to communicate. We visited a company last week where they had, you know, everybody in one warehouse, from the manufacturers, the maintainers, the developers, to the mission control. And that synergy and ability to collaborate was just mind-blowing. So when it's like, hey, we need to go faster, I think the synergies and the opportunities that we have to collaborate help us to understand and get out of our paradigm of, wait a minute, we got to go through this, so that we can, you know, move out a little faster. Yeah.
I think it comes down to risk as well, right? If you're talking about a no-fail mission, the speed may not be the issue if you want to make sure that it doesn't fail. And so I think there's a spectrum. And when we start to talk about software-based capabilities, and this is the real, I heard an interesting statement, software is a hypothesis, right? You don't actually know what you need until it shows up. And so that ability to rapidly iterate, I think, is incredibly important. And to the earlier point of how do we in DoD, including U.S. Coast Guard, how do we get to that rapid iteration of software capabilities so that we're meeting the warfighting need without putting it at risk? If you can fall back or you can delay implementation, I think there are ways to manage that risk. And so I think it's important to recognize there is a spectrum. It's not a binary thing.
Thank you very much. Ma'am.
Yes, LaTanya Griffith, Command Naval Regional Maintenance Center. I just had a question. I guess it's more so related to processes and risk. So related to the commercial internet service provider rules that we have, you know, we're working from home now. We're connecting at home. We're connecting all over. But, you know, you pretty much have to sell your first child if you want to get that presence in your command to do things that you might need to do outside of our DoD networks. Maybe download patches for legacy software or legacy systems that you still need to get to, but you can't use the DoD for. So I just wanted to know, have you all been looking at the different processes that we've had in the past that may need to be revamped to kind of consider how we can maybe use that, you know, when we're down on our DoD, and we can use that commercial internet service provider presence in our commands to keep working?
100%.
Yes.
100%. So, you know, the emergence of the pandemic, you know, in the Department of Navy, we went from, on any given day, about 12,000 people teleworking, to overnight we were over 250,000 people teleworking, right? And suddenly you're talking about hundreds of thousands of endpoints and people working outside the DoD. Right? How do you do that? And what happens? How do you make sure that our information is safe? You know, we had to create capability to be able to secure that. And we can now, today, secure hundreds of thousands of endpoints wherever they are in the world, and not just monitor. And when we see it wrong, we can quarantine, mitigate, fix it, whether it's on your home network, or, you know, it's in another country, or it's on the Navy's network. The Navy and the Marine Corps are both doing this, and they are demonstrating some immense capability. You know, this thing of saying we are going to do work not on the DoD, it's kind of paradigm busting, right? But it absolutely fits with where we're going from a world of zero trust. You know, we talk real big, like, oh, we're going to do zero trust. We can operate on the adversary's network. Yeah, big talk, but we for sure need to be able to operate on your home network, right? And we should be able to operate wherever we are. Now, the good news is we're doing it. We've got the partnership, we've got the tools, and the really good news is the Navy and the Marine Corps are, in my opinion, pacing the entire DoD on creating that capability. So you're 100% right. That's a reality that we have today. I would argue, and I will argue, that's a strength. So now our ability to do that has caused us to create capability that's giving sailors and Marines tools they never had. A great use case is the Naval Reserves. Used to be that if you were a reservist, you'd have to go drive to a recruiting center to log in with your CAC, you know, to go check your email once a month or whatever it is. Now we provide that capability directly to a reservist. They're able to access that from home without having to use a CAC card. And it is a game changer for the reserves. And there's a whole bunch of other examples, but all that is born from exactly as you point out, the need to be able to operate on any network. So you betcha.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
That was good.
Yeah.
Just one thing to add. So we're going to a remote work. So most of the Coast Guard work's done on class. It's really easy for us to do telework and remote work. For my organization, I usually have about a 50% active duty fill rate for my billets. This year, it's going to go up to 70%. And that's mostly because we're having folks that typically would be getting out of the service, staying in the service, and working remotely. Some of them working from the Midwest, some of them working from, definitely in CONUS, but definitely places that are not on the coast. And so I think remote work is going to be a good thing for us as far as fill. The thing that I'm concerned about is how do you maintain that dedication to mission? How do you maintain the camaraderie? That's going to be a challenge. So we'll work through that, but it is something that I'm concerned about.
Thank you. Admiral.
NAM. So I love Mr. Weiss's imagery of essentially a risk blivet, right? That fuel bladder that the Marine sits on one corner of and all the fuel goes to the other part of the bladder, and quite often that's exactly how we manage risk. But I think both of you two on the left have extreme positive experience in bringing disruptive change into the risk equation by putting focus on legacy and vigorously attacking where we have legacy. It increases our spend, it has technical deficit, it has a risk that when addressed does change the risk direction and often broadly. And General Lawrence, you know, when you pulled together 1,400 Army Active Directory systems and single enterprise email system, that reduced risk systemically across the Army. Mr. Weiss, your Roundup program that is putting best and brightest around killing legacy, I think it's brilliant. So let me pivot and go back to when Admiral Joyner was the combo on the Blue Ridge, and about 15 years ago when I was out in 7th Fleet. For every one blue dot or purple dot we had on our common operational picture, there was maybe half a red dot on any given day. Today, tain't so. And in 15 years, a peer adversary has generated a much higher rate of combat capacity. One would suggest they have a higher combat capacity ROI on their investments than we have had in that same time frame. And as we look at JADC2 and think about, well, how are we going to turn that around? Well, we're going to do it, I hope, with manned and unmanned systems that start to bring numbers parity in the, quantity has its own quality, as Stalin said. How do we keep JADC2 from being so expensive at the UE, at the endpoint, that we can't afford, or we bust the bank in our combat capacity ROI in trying to extend JADC2 out to all the things we want to be lethal?
So let me ask a question to clarify your question. Are you referring to on the and CNO Gilday has said we're going to have a hybrid fleet, right? There's going to be some combination of unmanned and manned, whether we're talking about space, air, surface, subsurface. So hybrid fleet is a going-in argument, no issue there. So when you're talking about affordability, are you talking about the affordability of the sophistication of the technology that's on some of these?
Well, let me bring it right down to the radio on the thing that you want to talk to.
Okay.
Right? And China today, you've all seen them, fireworks. They fly 2,000 UAVs, drones, all information into these beautiful fireworks. They're all communicating with each other, right? And they're communicating each other very efficiently with chipsets that, GPS on a chipset is a nickel on a chipset because they're using 4G, 5G technologies, right? So as we look forward, and very shrewdly has volunteered and is leading the non-terrestrial network protocols for 5G. China is leading the control plane for 5G and setting up for 6G. It just seems to me that the adversary is going to smartly build around commercial technologies and think about those endpoints and the cost of those endpoints and potentially be able to bring scale of unmanned objects into the battle space in a way that if we approach JADC2, where we, in a proprietary way, create communications for endpoints that are 10 times, 100x, 1,000x to that GPS is a nickel in a chipset kind of cost level, that combat capacity ROI we won't catch up with.
I think that's a fair point. The other thing that I think we need to explore, and to your point about affordability, is this mindset that it must all be hardware based, as opposed to being software defined, zero trust at the root of it. And so it goes back to the culture change that I was talking about. How do we shift DoD's mindset from the way we used to build systems, and we may still build the no-fail mission systems that way, but how do we shift all of our focus, our ability to focus on how do we get to software developed? How do we get to zero trust attributes? And to your point, understanding at what point enough zero trust is enough. Because if data is ephemeral, you probably don't need as much zero trust as if it is back in an IC database somewhere and not likely to change. And so it's, again, that spectrum of approach, software-based, data-centric. If we can modernize leveraging commercial capabilities and understanding what we must secure and how, and I see that change happening in the acquisition system. I see it, Dr. Xu and R&E and the work that they are doing, the work that DARPA's doing. We're starting to make that shift, and now we're looking at how do we get it over the valley of death, right? Because we've done a lot of innovation in the past and it hasn't gone anywhere. So now how do we not just make the cultural change, but get it across the valley of death so it can be sustained? It's a leave behind capability that we're not just dropping on somebody and saying, okay, it's your job now. So hopefully that helps.
I think you used the key word there, proprietary, right? You know, I'm going to use the example of proliferated low Earth orbit. Now, in the past, we'd launched satellites. We have a few satellites that'll cost $1 billion each, right? And we'll hug them tightly, and there's a few of them up there. You know, industry, and General Glavy referenced it, industry is at a point where they're putting 60 of these things at a time in orbit at a cost that's 90% less than we used to be able to do that. And as we speak today, a company has 3,400 satellites orbiting the planet, all interconnected with a laser mesh, moving massive amounts of data in orbit across that capability. Did the DoD design that? Did we do a JSIDS process and do years of requirements and thousands of pages? Did we go through a 5-year turnaround from need identified to need fielded? That's if everything works perfectly. No. And I think exactly to your point, we have to be able to embrace what's available today from our industry partners. And the challenge is how quickly can we do it? I was briefing the SecNav on proliferated low Earth orbit, and he asked a great question. He said, well, what's the limiting factor for us to be able to use this? Because it's ready now, it's working now. Everywhere, poles, every ocean, it's lit up. He said, what's the limiting factor? I said, the limfac is us. That we have to stop trying to DOD the crap out of every new capability that we do. You know, the challenge is how do you take that commercially available thing and integrate it into a solution that we can apply? You know, by partnering and working closely with industry, whether it's a software provider or a commercial SATCOM provider, and learning through the conversation of what is the art of possible, what do you have now, how do we make use of that, I think you dramatically shorten the curve, right? And to get back to your, I think your initial question was how do we make JADC2 not be unbearably expensive?
Yeah, thank you. And as General Lawrence would say, move out and draw fire.
There you go. Thank you. Ma'am?
Yes, hi, I'm Catherine from Tridus. We do encryption of data at all levels of classification. So I have to say that I starred the golden requirement because that really speaks to how we believe that data, no matter where it is, wired, wirelessly, whatever level, should always be encrypted. And also, being that we provide CSFC, leveraging the commercial world and enabling more of these commercial devices to be used in these classified spaces and arenas. So my question to you is, what are your needs with making sure the user tactical edge, the endpoints, has seamless real-time access to the data, especially when it comes to the user experience, without compromising securing that data?
Great question.
Hopefully, Mr. Weiss is an expert at this without a doubt. So we have spent the last 3 years totally transforming the network. I mean, totally. To the question earlier, I was kind of shocked. You can get on this network anywhere in the world. And so I believe that we have indeed, you know, not there yet, not completely there, but this whole movement into the cloud has totally changed how we do business. From network operations to defensive cyberspace operations, you can't hide. You cannot hide. Everything Glavy does can be read back to me, and I got some of my world-famous Marine Corps Cyberspace Operation Group folks in here. They know everything I do. They know everything I do. They can tell when there's anomalous behavior with Glavy and certainly take appropriate actions from a defensive cyberspace. It has taken roles that we have classically put into bins and kind of busted that up. And if I can do defensive cyberspace operations at real time based on a security incident event management system that's censored throughout the network, that I know in the past we'd have to deploy agents, days, slow down our CPU usage, back to user experience, right? Awful. Did what we had to do, what we knew and how to do it. Now, again, totally disruptive, completely transformed. Started at the IL5, unclassified, controlled and unclassified level, now into IL6, right? IL6 is where we're going to fight and win. So IL6 has to be done right. The ability, again, back to this idea of readiness, is I may not have all my stuff with me, right? I'm thinking server stacks upon server stacks, right? I got to go get what I need from an app-based environment to fight, right, based on endpoints that have capacity to do so, right, and to do based on, training exercise into crisis conflict. Because we're not going to have the opportunity, right, freedom of move, freedom of action, to bring the Iron Mountain to where we need it. So we are, in the middle of this transformation. It's, 3 years ago, we didn't do any of this, right? COVID helped. Certainly, there's always good to have a requirement, a little focus for DoD. When the big machine moves, it moves fast. But man, they're hopefully everybody who's DoD, has the ability to get on their damn network anytime and where they need to, based on whatever. And it's not just telework, and telework's important. It's about readiness for us. Right? I got Marines in First Island chain all over God's green earth, in the high north to Mr. Weiss. Right? They need information. They need data to do their job. So hopefully we're getting there. Maybe we need to move faster, but that's where we're going to thrive in that environment.
And I would like to just foot stomp what you said of aisle 6, right? So we're now fairly comfortable doing this stuff in aisle 5. We've got emerging capability, we've got kind of next level capability, extreme levels of mobility. It's all good. You know, if we flip over to the aisle 6 side of the house, SIPRNet, man, it's like 1999. And so we have got to be able to extract the goodness from what we've done on aisle 5 and bring it to aisle 6. But I'm here to tell you, I mean, policies will be harmed in that migration, right? Because we've changed the paradigm through encryption, through zero trust, through transport agnostic comms, and we're securing the data, not the pipe, right? We've got to bring that thought process to the warfighting network because that's not how it is today. And this is another one, the LIMFAC is us. We're going to have to be able to face outdated ways of doing things and policies associated with it and knock it down. Because we have the solution we've demonstrated in aisle 5 at scale. The aisle 5 environment of the Department of Navy, between Navy and Marine Corps, is 700,000 endpoints. We're doing it today at a next level. The aisle 6 environment is 1/10 of that, maybe 70,000. And yet the policy barrier to be able to translate that capability from aisle 5 to aisle 6 is huge, and we're going to have to go after it.
Thank you.
Good? Okay, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the work that you're doing to drive our forces forward. I was just retired from naval service last summer, so I spent more time in the military than I have so far in industry. So please forgive the relative naivete that probably comes with some of these questions. But I currently work as a customer success manager at Dataminer. I work on the Department of the Navy team, and the Department of Defense has purchased an enterprise-wide contract through 2026, where every single DoD member could get access to our artificial intelligence and machine learning event detection platform today. But as we're trying to roll out this platform, we're doing it very much one-to-one. And when we get the chance to sit down with senior leaders, we get some great success and some great buy-in. But we're moving far too slow. How do we take advantage of the existing policies, the existing mechanisms and mandates within the services to more rapidly roll out these tools so that we don't get to 2026 and realize that a bunch of folks that could have been benefiting from this platform weren't during that time? Counterpoint to that, General Glavy, Admiral Hines, I know that you are both users of the platform. If it is not in a situation at this point that it would be something worth rolling out to the entire forces, what can I bring back to my team to refine it and make something more usable to the Department of Navy?
What was the platform? Sorry.
Yeah, what was the tool?
I've lost my hearing here.
No worries at all. It's the First Alert AI and machine learning event detection platform that is owned and operated by Dataminer.
Okay, so I'm just going to say I'm not tracking it.
Yeah, we use it.
I'm not going to try to fake it. Cool, I didn't know we had that.
You're talking about the first alert that we get, notifications of, hey, this is going on, that's going on.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's on. Yeah, I am.
Admiral Hines.
And so, but what is the challenge or the ask again? So, have we not provided you with feedback of the utility of it, or?
So at this point, and I think, again, I'm going to ask for the forgiveness on my own naivete that I'm bringing into this. When I was in the force, I wasn't aware that this tool existed either until I was interviewing with the company and realized I could have had access to it at no additional cost to the unit because it was already paid for.
It's awesome, and I started using it when I was with the CNO. So, and I know there's a first alert group, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're already signed up." So, I'm just wondering if we haven't given you that feedback that, yeah, this is a groovy tool, and It's something that we really want, so.
We have the ACMAC on board and the Commandant staff, and then the CNO is on board as well. But in terms of our relative capacity to actually roll it out, and Department of the Navy is experiencing this, but the whole DoD team is, our ability to actually go communicate this value and spend our time onboarding people as opposed to just continuing to communicate the value to the force.
Got it.
We're spending more time communicating than we are onboarding, and I think that's also diminishing our ability to refine this product and make it even more usable. As someone that, again, is going to ride more on my military identity than my industry identity, I want to be able to, for the service, get to the point where we have so many people on board that my team and I are spending the time refining the product and making it more effective. It directly answers the question of shortening the distance between the sensor and the warfighter.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I will take that back, and we'll give you some feedback, and I'll see where the bottleneck is. But I thought, yeah, we're all using this, but apparently not. So I got that for action. Thank you.
Ma'am. Appreciate that.
Please.
Sorry. Tim Gramp, Chief Engineer from Air Force Syscom. What you're kind of describing is this problem of, with the speed at which software capabilities and other tools and things are growing across the Department of Navy, but across the DoD, I think we are often recreating. We're doing a lot in parallel, whether that's just lack of awareness that there's tools that are available. This is one interesting one.
Yeah.
But this, pick your area, cybersecurity tool, software factories. There is a lot of duplication of effort across the department because of just lack of awareness in some cases. The speed that things are moving and the lack of being able to be aware of those different activities that are going. So if I'm abstracting your problem a little bit, I think that is one, I guess, how from your perspective, from your seats, how do we share that across better so we take advantage of existing tools as opposed to recreating them?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Much better said than what I had to offer.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah, I think it's I'll just jump on it. There's a combination of issues that you touch on there. You know, yes, oftentimes there's a proliferation of tools, and not for wrong reasons. All good Americans trying to solve problems, right? And they got visited by a salesperson who said, we could do that, and they said, we're buying it, we're doing it. And it does become a challenge. So, you know, from a CIO perspective, what we want to do is try to help provide some guidelines. You know, DevSecOps environments is a great example of that. DevSecOps environments are like every program wants to stand up their own pipeline, their own DevSecOps environment. And these things have the potential to proliferate wildly. Again, all for good reasons. People want to do the right thing. We want to enable capability, build secure software, move at speed. Goodness. But if you fast forward, what we could end up with is an environment where we've got dozens, hundreds of these environments, and all of the dream of reciprocity and shared containers and moving software around becomes really difficult because we did that over and over again. I have an analogy that, you know, we need to be strategic. We need to be strategic in our use of DevSecOps environments. And I think about them like the way we would think about shipyards, right? We have a limited number of shipyards. Some are privately owned, some are government owned, Navy owned. And they all have they all serve a purpose. Some work in steel, some work in aluminum, some build undersea, some focus on nuclear, and. But there's a reason that we have that portfolio of shipyards, because if we want to get something done, we have it done in the right place. And I use that analogy to DevSecOps environments. We're not going to just have one. That's never going to work. But we also don't want 100. And there's a right number, and there will be a right use. Some will serve tactical application development needs. Some will serve enterprise application development needs. Some will work on the high side. Some will be IL6 environments. And we're going to have to be able to formulate that. To your very good question of how do we avoid duplication, I think it's kind of, part of it starts with the Don CIO and governance to be able to lay down the lane markings so that we don't end up in that. But we want to do that without stopping progress. So one of the things that I would never want to say as a CIO is stop what you're doing while we take time and figure out how to create some policy or some governance. So it's a balance. It's a balance, and for sure, while we enable people to run fast, we need to be working hard to get the lines of communication in the background so that we don't paint ourselves into a corner, but at the same time, create a way forward that we can all leverage. It's a great question.
Yeah, awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Gentlemen and lady, I am sorry we've run out of time. I think the folks will hang around for a few minutes afterwards that you could talk to them, but thank you all very much for those questions and the discussion. You didn't let me down. So please join me in thanking this distinguished panel for their service and all that they're doing for our nation.
General Lawrence and panel members, again, thank you for your time today. This invigorating discussion on the golden requirement, the journey of modernization and innovation, the decision superiority, the Agile C5 organization, and exposing the data. What a great discussion today. We do have a book for each of you called War Transform, and I will present that to you as you exit the stage. Thanks again for being with us today. Please take a moment to share your thoughts on this discussion by completing the session survey in the West app. And then as we depart, I hope you will join us in the keynote space at the other end of the exhibit hall for the AFCEA Women's Appreciation Reception that's starting right now, and all are welcome. And we open tomorrow's program at 08:30 Pacific time with a keynote presentation from the Honorable Carlos Del Toro, Secretary of the Navy. So thank you.
Great meeting you.